Hi, I'm Becky Simms. I'm the founder and CEO at Reflect Digital, and I'm here today at the Brighton SEO Fringe event, the online PR show. And I'm so excited to share my talk with you, the psychology of the journalist, creating winning pitches, which at the end of the day, that's what we all want, isn't it? So let's get started. There's a couple of really important traits to a successful PR professional. And hopefully as I run through these, you're going to be kind of nodding along if that's your discipline and that's what it is that you're doing in your day-to-day role. So we've got resilience. You have to be resilient. You're pitching pieces that you believe in, that you think should get coverage, and you're trying to get these different media outlets to take them on board and to give them the love that you've shown to them. So it's a really tough job because you don't win every pitch, and sometimes it's not even through you've not packaged it up right, it's just that another piece of news has hit and you've fallen to the bottom of the pile. So there's real resilience there to kind of work out what's going on and to keep pushing and keep trying, and sometimes that's keep pushing with the same story. We've then got creativity. Now, you might have a story that you think, yeah, it's kind of good, but you've got to be creative. You've got to package it up in the right way to sell it to the journalist that's going to publish it, but sell it to the audience as well. So there's a real kind of creative streak to our PR professionals. And then finally, it's the relationship building. This industry was founded on those relationships, and as much as through the internet and being able to communicate and using social media, etc., means that everyone's so much more accessible, the relationship is still so important. That ability to build a rapport, to really understand the journalist and what type of content they're looking for, and allowing you to know who to go to at the right time and to not burn those bridges by just keep pitching things that are the wrong things to them. So relationships are really, really important. But I want to help arm you with a new tool today, something that you can start to think about when you're creating these pitches. Mind reading. Well, maybe it's not quite mind reading, but it sounds good, doesn't it? It's not too far off, because what we've been able to do is help you create a fresh approach to your PR pitches by understanding the journalist, because this can be the most rewarding part of your job. But it also can be the most frustrating part of PR, because getting rejected, or in most cases you don't get rejected, you just don't get a response. But it's fundamental to your success in being a good PR professional, in being able to create those winning pitches. So having a process and taking a test and learn approach is vital. And I guess I question with all of you how much you're doing this already, because that ability to test and learn, to structure your press release in a particular way and to have really thought about what you've done differently here. Try a few in that same way, look at the results, look at the impact, and then come back and maybe try another way. And that's something that I think we can all so easily just get into the pattern and the rhythm of, well, I've always done it this way. But I'd like you to take away from today that you should be testing and learning, and you should be thinking about those little incremental differences you can make by just how you package things up and how you get it to the right audience. So test and learn is really, really vital. Now within our team, so as Reflect Digital, we sit as part of the lab group, and there's 4 agencies there, and one of our sister agencies, Verge, are the most amazing brainy bunch of behavioural scientists, and we're so lucky to have them there because there is such a crossover between everything we do in the world of digital PR, SEO, PPC, and understanding human behaviour and how humans work. So we set them a challenge. We said, well, actually, it would really help us in our digital PR world to understand journalists better, to get under the skin of what they're looking for, and to be able to create better pitches that gives us more chance of success. So step 1, we came up with this idea and then we needed to run with it. So we had this idea of creating a personality quiz so that we could start to learn a bit more about journalists. We wanted to understand how they gather information, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing when we're giving them a press release. We're giving them the information. So the more we understand how their processes work and how they're thinking about information, the better. So we opted to use Kolb's experiential learning model. Now, you can go away and read up on this, and on screen we've got an example of how this process works. But in a minute, I'm going to break it down into a more basic version. Because what we were trying to do was define their learning styles, so how they gather information. So the more basic, simplified version is thinking about the fact that as humans, we sit in this quadrant of kind of why, what, how, what if. So we used that to create these profiles. And this is where our creativity came in, because as you all know, getting the attention of a journalist is really difficult. So if we wanted them to take a personality test, we were going to need to be really creative in our approach to get their attention, to take their time away and to do this personality quiz. So we came up with these 4 profiles. And I'm going to run you through each of these now. And this was a tool that you could do online. You can still find it now at yourinsidestory.co.uk. And it takes them through a number of questions and it helps us work out which of the styles they fit into. So we had the news hound. Now, the news hound fits into that why category. And the news hound is stimulated by things that are current and relevant. So they prefer to look at that bigger picture and see the causes for the current situation. So the news hound is going to have that real strong sense of context. They want to make meaning of stories. And they're often going to be asking the question, why? Because they really want to understand reasons and intentions. We've then got the truth hunter. So this is more in the what box. So you are stimulated by that new and interesting facts if you're a truth hunter. You favour knowledge of a subject in that detailed communication. And you need that real strong sense of clarity to make meaning of stories. So as a truth hunter, you're going to often be asking the question, but what is that specifically? You really want to get into the detail. And then we've got the storyteller, the how. So the storyteller is stimulated by narrative and the crossing over of different stories. They really enjoy events that unfold over time. And they thrive on piecing together the puzzle. So they're often going to be asking the question of, but how does that happen? To understand the thought processes and the actions that are going on. And then finally, we've got the thought leader, and they fit into that kind of what if box. So they're stimulated by imagining what the future could look like. They favour the bigger picture thinking and see the various consequences that unfold. And they thrive on speculation and what difference it's going to make. So they'll often be asking that what if question to understand the importance of the current events. So as you might imagine, because people love to learn about themselves, we got a lot of nosy people with the questionnaire. So luckily we had the foresight to think this might happen, and we ensured that through the people that answered that we qualified who they were. So out of our, I think we probably had about 700 or 800 responses, we had 200 genuine journalists, which is great as a sample size when we're looking at such a niche kind of area. We also asked them which type of journalist they fitted into. So as you can see, we had majority kind of broadsheet and local, and then a few tabloid, and then less in the broadcast section. Now at this level of data, we haven't then sliced all of our different findings into the different sectors, but that might be something for if we can encourage some more journalists to come and give us a bit more data to get us to that point. But the results are super interesting. I'm so excited to share these with you. So what personas did they fall into? Well, we had 53% in that thought leader position, 26% were storytellers, 15% the news hound, and then just 6% the truth hunter, so really getting into the nitty-gritty of the detail. And what's really interesting is that it means 79% of journalists are dynamic thinkers. So the majority sit in that dynamic area, which means that they want to understand context more and impact, as opposed to explicit thinking, where it's going to be more in the detail and the numbers. We often look at dynamic thinking as the kind of right brain styles of thinking. And that means that these are active learners. They learn by being involved and understanding that way. They want to experiment with the ideas. They want to be part of mixing the bits together and trying to work out what works and what doesn't. And they consider different perspectives. So they've got a really wide viewpoint where they're not just going to take their opinion, but they want to take as many opinions as possible in. And to build their narrative, and I think the important word here is their narrative. They want to be part of shaping this story. They're likely to really enjoy interaction and to build understanding through Q&A, because for them, they want to be part of shaping that narrative and asking the right questions to ensure that they can tell the story that they want to tell. Now hold the front page. They are likely to be shaping the narrative right up until that last minute. It's the story's never finished probably in their minds. And they're really flexible at utilising what they've been given. So that kind of wide angle view that they'll take of what they're looking at, they'll be able to take what you've given them and to think about it from those different perspectives. And most important to them is providing a brilliant answer. But the key here is it's not necessarily answering the question that they set out to answer. So whereas I think sometimes we can get really hung up on, I'm going to write a piece about this and I'm going to have to find the story that fits it. For the more dynamic thinkers, they will let that continue to be shaped as it's going along. And if it means they end up answering a completely different question, that's okay. So what does this really mean though? So the majority of journalists are interested in understanding the impact, the so what, the kind of more future thinking. So just like you want the so what from me right now, I'm sure, so do they from your story. So you need to hook them in, not with just the story in the now, but you need to show them the future and what does this mean? And you need to make yourself available to them by making contact early. So the fact that they want to be involved in shaping the story, if you just hand them a press release, completely finished, done and dusted, it's got to go out today, there's no time to make any kind of changes or do any more research, well, they might be less inclined to want to run with it. Whereas if you've engaged early, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month ahead, 6 months ahead, if it's a big research piece, and you've asked them, does this sound right to you? Is this something your audience would be interested in? And you've got their buy-in and you're working with them and taking their feedback on board, they're going to be so much more invested. And they can help shape that narrative. So while we had the attention of these journalists, we decided to ask them what type of content they want, because it's quite important that we understand that. So up on top here, we've got real experiences. They want real life. Then we've got data and surveys, and then it starts to drop off a bit more. We've got long form content, all the way down to quizzes and games. Now we'll come back to that point in a minute. So the storytellers and the thought leaders favour those real life experiences to build their narrative. It's something that they can really use to create the type of story that they like to share. And the news hounds and the truth hunters like that more explicit and factual content. So that's where we'll see in that list long form content was coming up, and that's what they're looking for. And the data and surveys side of PR and creating a story, that is useful to all types of journalists, and definitely something that you should be thinking about when you're creating the different narratives that might turn into PR. Now we know from experience, and some of you may have seen before, I've been on the Brighton SEO stage talking about gamification and how it can be great for building links. And I fully stand by that. So although we saw it was bottom of the list there, we know that there are certain verticals and certain types of journalists that love this type of thing. So for example, we've seen huge success in link building with games in the sporting world, because as an audience, as the end user, as it were, of the media, they love quizzes, games, showing their knowledge, etc. So I guess what I'm saying with the type of content, this was asked to them as a general question, but what you then need to think about is for your audience in particular, what does this mean? So then again, while we had their attention, we decided to ask them what makes them trust a website, with the view to thinking about, if we're trying to generate links, what are we looking for as trust signals? So good contact info comes out on top, trusted data about us, etc. So there's a really clear indication of what journalists trust, and that is the transparency of the source. So by having your contact data or your contact pages, your data sources, and anything on your website that's going to help build that trust, that's really important. We've then got the kind of UX and content side of things on the website. We want to make sure that the website is accessible and credible. They want websites that have that real kind of human intent as opposed to just being full of advertising. They're not going to want to drive their audience there. And finally, information about the company is much less important. So you don't need to be showing them anything around financial information, org structure, anything like that. That's not going to help them trust your piece of content. So I've got a case study for you, and then I'm gonna tell you a quick bit about this, and then we're going to go into my top 5 tips for you to take away from today, and I'm going to relate them back to this case study. So earlier this year, March, we'll all remember it, lockdown hit. One of our clients, Simply Hops, which is part of the Bathhouse Group, which is a business, they are a hops producer. So they produce hops that go into beers across the world. And Simply Hops in particular is in the craft market. So they're helping out those kind of more micro breweries and the small breweries that operate in the craft world across Europe in particular. And they were really worried. With lockdown happening and bottle shops being closed, etc., they could just see that the public were going to end up just defaulting to the supermarket beers, and that their customers and the people that they really care about, their community, was going to suffer. So they had this idea of creating a website called Beer is Here. And they came to us and they said that if we create this, how do we get it out there to the masses? Because this will only be useful if lots of people can find it. So the idea was that it would be kind of a listing website, and all the different bottle shops, breweries, etc. could go on there, they could put their details, and they could tell you how you could get hold of their beer. So whether they were doing contact-free deliveries or whatever it was, they all had their different ways of doing it. But it was to keep them in business and to support the industry. And the minute we had the idea, or the client came to us with the idea and we helped them evolve it and shape it, we started talking to journalists. We wanted to find out, is this going to be of interest? Obviously, at the time, the news was so crazy with information going on about what was happening and lockdown and all the different industries. So we wanted to find out, how are we going to shape this in the right way for the audience? And as you can see, there's some results on screen here. It was phenomenal. And these results are probably 3-month results. It's actually continued on to be really successful since then. So what I'm going to do now is I'll take you through my top 5 tips, and we're going to link them back. So top 5 PR pitching tips. So number 1 is, where possible, use data. So data is going to help back up your story. Now the data part for us with Beer is Here actually came as day 2. So we ended up having 2 or 3 rounds of being able to push this as a story. So where we'd got our tracking in place on the website once it had launched, and we were driving loads of traffic, a lot of which was coming from PR, we were able to then create a narrative using that data of understanding what was kind of the average order value by talking to some of the suppliers, and then looking at all of the clicks that we were sending out to these sites and creating a kind of figure of, we're expecting we've had this impact on the industry. And that created another headline, and from a data perspective was really interesting to all of the journalists that we spoke to. We've then got the make contact early, so remembering that journalists are dynamic thinkers and they want to be part of forming that narrative. So as I've already touched on, that is exactly what we did with Beer is Here. We got their feedback. Their forming of the narrative meant that they ended up getting some free beers to try themselves in some cases. So there's the clever journalist that worked out that was a route they could go. But building that relationship is really important, and getting that feedback to ensure that you've got the right narrative for the different publications. Think impact, think future. Well, this story was all about the future, because as much as it was doing something now, it was protecting the industry for the future. So remembering that the majority of journalists are less interested in exactly now, they want to know impact. We were able to show them impact because the concern here was that these bottle shops and breweries would be closing down. So Simply Hops were doing everything they could to protect their industry, their community. Put a name to the story. So journalists are interested in the people and the humans behind the story, and less interested in those corporate messages. So again, we use this in the Beer is Here PR case study, in that we spoke to some of the brewers and got them front and center of the story. So in certain publications where it definitely was the angle that they wanted, we had the lead there, we had the human face, and we had their kind words around everything that Simply Hops was doing to help the industry. And then finally, now this is just a theme that runs through everything, is that building in the trust. So being transparent and building trust. So journalists want to know who you really are. They want to trust you. They want to believe in your story. So you need to be having that genuine conversation and being human back with them. And that definitely has stood us in good stead for all the work we do. Jo, who's our PR and media manager, she is an ex-journalist. She knows what journalists are looking for, and she knows how to build that rapport. So just remembering that transparency and trust are going to hold you in really high regard with journalists. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this really interesting. We've got a link on screen here. So this is our website, reflectdigital.co.uk/online-PR-show, and you can download the slides. You can find me on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and I'll be doing a Q&A a bit later on. Thank you so much for listening.